This machine is our sanding master, which is basically a wide belt sander. It's not an abrasive planer, it's a sander for taking off, probably a 64th of an inch at most in a pass. So this is the front view, and let's give the controls a look over. We see the air valve. Now that needs to be in line, not the blue handled one, but the one above it. It has to be in line for the machine to have air. If we go across, we see the air gauge, and that should be just about vertical, the indicator. Don't worry about the pressure. Unless we've lost complete air, that machine should be fine. If we travel up, this red button is the emergency stop. All right? It's sort of a power button. It is a button we do not want to push. If the machine is running and you push that button, it will inevitably destroy a belt. And in all the years I've been here, we have never had that need. This lever is when we're sanding very, very fine veneer. Generally, you don't need to worry about it. Now this lever I want to talk about for a moment. It controls the feed belt. Basically, the feed belt is the table that you place your board on that runs it through there. If you move this lever to the right, to the red circle, that stops the feed belt. If you move it to the left, it starts the feed belt. Raising the lever up raises the table and stops the feed belt. Pushing the lever down lowers the table and stops the feed belt. Anytime you change the table height, the feed belt will stop. It's just how the machine is designed. This black button in the middle of the round circle is a setting for how abrasive of a belt grit we're using. So for the vast majority of cases, we're going to have that button pointing to the right for calibrated sanding. That's 36 to 100 grit. If we're doing fine sanding, we may go to the left, and that'd be 120, 150 grit. Although a lot of the time, even if we're doing 120 grit, we're still keeping it on calibrated, pointing to the right. This knob is a micro adjust. Once you find your original setting using the shift lever we just talked about, you will use this to raise and lower the table. And usually it's about 3 or 4 rotations. Each rotation you can see is 3/1000ths of an inch. So, if you do 3 or 4, that's probably a pretty decent pass. But once you do your original setting, this is the wheel that you use to raise it up. This gauge indicates the motor load, and we typically want that gauge running between 0 and 20. We don't want it spiking out high. That's not good for the machine. It's not good for the belt. Normally between 0 and 20. And if I ever make a pass and for some reason it spikes higher than that, I'll probably run my board again without changing the table height to bring it down to a more manageable load rate. Above that, we have this gauge that we made and put on the machine to indicate what grit belt we have on here. So in this case, there's a 100 grit belt on the machine. Don't necessarily count on that being accurate. The intent is whatever grit is in the machine will be there as well. What we see here is the depth gauge, and we'll do a close-up in a second. This gauge gives you a good idea about where you are in terms of the thickness of the board that you're taking down. I do want to emphasize this is an approximate. Don't necessarily count on it being accurate. This is a close-up of the depth gauge, and it's base 10, so you need to know your decimal equivalents. And you're lining that mark that's labeled 0 up with the mark on the left, which gives you your basic height. So right here we're at about 0.75. 0.75 indicates 3/4 of an inch. There we're at about an inch, 1.00. That would be 1.25, 1 1/4. So you need to learn your decimal equivalents to get a fair understanding of how this machine works. I will say, however, don't count on it being overly accurate. These are the controls on the side of the machine. The blue button gives the machine power. It needs to be pointing to the right. And when it's pointing to the right, it has a light that goes on that indicates that. The red button and the black button control the abrasive belt. To press the black button turns the abrasive belt on. To turn the red button turns the abrasive belt off. Keep in mind that the abrasive belt and the feed belt are entirely different things. The abrasive belt does the sanding. The feed belt or table belt pulls the board through the machine. This knob controls the feed rate of the belt, how fast it pulls the stock through. Now we generally don't play with this one very much. We keep it at one setting. You can see that we have a set of indications here that tell how fast the belt should be going for different types of hardwoods and veneers. Let's take a look at the basic interior of this machine. Now we have 3 rollers that the belt travels on. And these levers adjust each one up and down, and this one shows the tracking of the belt. So those 3 rollers give you the path of the belt. Now if we look at these 2 knobs, which we don't touch very often, these raise and lower those individual rollers. And there's red marks on them to say where each one should be for the grit. And you'll go over that a lot more in depth next year with Mr. Tobias. Now let's go down here and take a look at this. This is where the platen is. So if I'm changing a belt for whatever, I'll turn this, it lifts out, and then this piece comes out to the side. And if I was changing belts, that's how I would go about doing it. But what I want to show you specifically here is the platen. This is the platen. It's a long piece that the belt travels over. This is covered in graphite, acts as a lubricant. You can see the dust on it. But this can come out and be replaced. So this is basically, that needs to be in here. And I'm going to reset this back to the proper marking. And go ahead and put these in. This is drops in, and maybe 1/8 of a turn at most. Now this button controls air to the belt, so by turning it, you can see how the belt became much under tension. If I was going to pull the belt out, I would loosen that lever, remove this, and then slide it out. But this knob puts tension under the belt. This is a switch. So if the belt drifts too far this way, it will activate that switch and shut the machine down. It's a safety for the belt coming too far to one side, and there's one on the other end of the belt as well. A lot of times if you go to start the machine, you may find that the belt drifted too far one way to the other. and you're going to have to reset it. So to reset it, what you would do is loosen the tension and slide the belt to the proper area and give it tension again. And that way it would be then ready to go. The right side of the machine has the brakes, it has the drive system. We don't go in here much, but there is one detail that I want to show you, and that is the location of the electric eye that sometimes clutters up and needs to be wiped off. I want to show you where the electric eye is on the right side of the machine as you're facing it. When you look inside, you'll see this blue box that has a sensor mounted to the front of it. That's where the electric eye is. You can see how covering the electric eye makes the noise stop right away. So that should be kept clear. What sometimes happens though is it gets covered with dust and you have to reach in here and just give it a little wipe off, and then it's good to go.